to the November 13th Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting. I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. And first item on our agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone from the public, Stephen, that would like to address the committee?
We didn't have anybody who signed up in advance, but we can provide an opportunity if anyone wants to raise their hand virtually. We can take a comment or two. Seeing any hands? Oh, okay. I see Dave Robinson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you for the brief moment. I thought I should just let people know citizens of King City have initiated a recall for all but one of their city councilors, including the mayor, based on the overwhelming opposition to the transportation system plan and lack of focus on Beef Bend Road. And so the reason I'm bringing that up now is because I'm hoping we can have conversations around how Beef Bend can improve between River Terrace 2.0 with Tigard and then Kingston Terrace with King City. That whole area has become a very clogged up mess, and the infrastructure is going to rely on Sherwood Tualatin Road, Roy Rogers, and to a very large extent, Beef Bend. And I believe there's always an argument there's always some debate around who owns Beef Bend Road. And so I would look to the Washington County leadership to consider some advice and guidance on how that road should look over the next 30 years. Because at the moment, if there's not broader oversight, Tigard and King City will develop down there and we'll be stuck with a failed road. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Anyone else, Stephen?
Don't see any additional hands up. I think that's it.
All right. That brings us to item number 2, our introductions roll call. So go ahead, Stephen, go ahead and call the roll, please.
All right. Again, in order of jurisdiction, I'll run through these. Mayor Burbanks, Mayor Jones.
I'm here.
Thank you. Beaverton, Mayor Beatty. I haven't seen her yet. We'll keep an eye out. All right. For Cornelius, Mayor Delane.
Present.
Thank you. City of Durham, Mayor Sherrado, I haven't seen yet. We'll keep an eye out as well. For Forest Grove, Mayor Wenzel.
Here.
Thank you. For Hillsboro, Mayor Callaway.
Present.
Thank you. King City, Mayor Fender.
Here.
Thank you. North Plains, Mayor Linehan.
Here.
Thank you. City of Sherwood, I know we have Councilor Mays on today, Council President Mays.
Yep.
Thank you. City of Tigard, Mayor Lou.
Here.
Thank you. City of Tualatin, Mayor Bubenik.
Here.
Thank you. And I think our Wilsonville representative, Councilor Dunwell, may be joining just a few minutes late. And Commissioner Fai for Washington County.
Present.
Thank you. And I know for Metro we have, yep, Councilor Rosenthal is with us. Thank you.
Yes.
ODOT, Stephanie Turner.
Yep, here. And I know that Chris Ford and Zoe will be joining us later as well.
Thank you. I don't think we have a port rep today. Let's see, and I saw Tara for TriMet is here.
Yep, I'm here.
Great, thank you.
And
Okay, that completes our roll call for now.
Yep, Councilor Dunwell just showed up. Welcome.
Hello,
Thank you.
I'm here. Thank you.
I see Mayor Fender's hand is up.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know, just because the public comment today did relate to King City. I wanted everyone to know I did hear those comments. I was just stuck in the kind of public location. So just to clarify the record, I did hear Mr. Robinson's comments and just wanted to make sure that was clear. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that brings us to item number 3, consideration of our meeting summary from October 16th, 2023. Did everyone have a chance to review, and are there any needs for changes? We have a motion to adopt if no one has changes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt our Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting summary for October 16, 2023. Any discussions on those motions? All those in favor say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
Opposed? See none. Abstentions? Seeing none, looks like it's unanimous. All right, that brings us to information discussion items. First one, 4A, is the TV Highway Transit Project update, and that'll be led by Jessica. Welcome, Jessica. Not Jessica Pels. Is it Zadib or Zadib? How do you pronounce your last name, Jessica? Is she here, Stephen?
Yep, I think we are getting her promoted now.
All right.
There we are.
I'm
Right.
here. It just took a minute to promote me as panelist.
All right. How do I pronounce your last name correctly?
It's Zadeb.
Deb, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and nice to see some familiar faces here from our steering committee for this project and meet those of you who I haven't met. My name is Jess Zadeb, and I'm a principal regional planner at Metro and the project manager for the TV Highway Transit and Safety Project. So I'm excited to give a little update today. I know that this project was presented quite a while ago to WCCC by the prior project manager, Aaron Key. So I'm just back with an update about what we have been up to in the intervening months and where we're headed with the work of the project in the coming months. So I will share a presentation and all right, I think everyone should see a PowerPoint at this point. Thank you for the thumbs up, Stephen. All right, so today I'm going to give an overview of the project, kind of the purpose and goals of what we're doing on TV Highway, a summary of our work to date, and then a summary of our upcoming work and focusing both on design, costing, and engagement in those two arenas. So the purpose of our project, and this is directly from the adopted purpose and need statement that our steering committee approved in 2022, is to improve the speed, reliability, accessibility, and safety for transit riders on TV Highway, and in particular, communities of color and low-income communities. And you'll see on mapping in a little bit that we know that those communities are present on the TV Highway corridor in higher numbers than in other areas, both of the county and of the region. So the Line 57 is a focus for us because it really is a workhorse and a lifeline for a lot of residents and employees in this corridor. It's the 5th highest ridership line in the TriMet system, in the TriMet bus system. And during COVID, it had really high retention of ridership. It was the 2nd highest retention of a frequent service line during COVID-19. And that's second only to the highest ridership line in the system, which is the other one that we're studying right now as a region for a bus rapid transit, which is the line 72 on 82nd Avenue in Portland. And that ridership retention has really stayed, and the 57 continues to outperform the other lines in the system in terms of how many riders have been returning to it compared to the overall system average. Early in this project, TriMet conducted a rider survey actually on board the Line 57 with pretty good response. I think about 600 respondents, and of those folks who were surveyed, 70% of them said that they don't have access to a vehicle. So we really know that this is a line that needs study and needs upgrade for those folks who rely on it. Just a little bit of information about who lives in this corridor, who the line does serve. As I said, it's a corridor that has a really high percentage both of people of color at 49% of residents, and then also a high percentage of low income individuals. And our study area that these stats are pulled from is the half mile on either side of TV Highway along the line 57. And the 57 runs from Beaverton Transit Center out through Beaverton, Aloha, Hillsboro, Cornelius, and Forest Grove, and it terminates at 19th and B in Forest Grove. So our steering committee, which consists of several folks who are on this call today and other leaders from agency partners, approved a set of goals for this project early on. These are the 3 goals that really push the project team and project partners to be ambitious and expansive in our thinking. We want to improve that travel experience for folks who are already taking transit. We want this project to also dovetail with adopted goals of our partner agencies in the corridor. And we also really want to figure out how we can have a project that is supported by the community. We want something to be implemented on TV Highway that is really going to serve the needs that exist out there and be responsive to what folks have told us they're looking for in terms of transit and safe access to transit. So those are the first 3 goals of this project. The second 2 goals are the ones that I like to think of as being those that ground us and that sometimes can be in tension with those other goals that have us thinking a bit more in an expansive way. So we know that there's been so much planning on TV Highway by different agencies, many of whom, again, are represented on this call today. We want a project that is feasible to fund, construct, and operate, and one that is able to move into the next phase into project development, which is capitalized here because it's an actual FTA, Federal Transit Administration term for the grant program that we would likely be seeking funding through. So these are the goals that really keep us focused on making sure that something happens for TV Highway out of this project effort. So what are we looking at in terms of a project? To date, TriMet has 1 frequent express or FX service in the region. That's the FX2 on Division in Portland and Gresham that opened a little over a year ago and has seen some really good success in that year. So we're trying to figure out how the elements that comprise FX would apply on TV Highway. And the elements that we're looking at are both defined by how TriMet is thinking about bus rapid transit in this region and also by guidance from the FTA, because as I said, we are likely to pursue funding for them for this project. So those elements that we're taking a look at are improvements to the stations. So making sure that people are no longer just standing on TV Highway next to a pole in a shoulder adjacent to a ditch and a railroad. We want them to have really a dignified rider experience. So we're talking about the stations themselves and the amenities that would be at those locations while folks are waiting for the bus. We're looking at transit priority, both in terms of changes to the signals along the corridor, and then where possible, also limited transit priority lanes or queue jumps at signals. Station access is a really important part of this project. We know that there have been, TV Highway is a challenging place to be a pedestrian, and especially we know that a lot of the fatal and serious injury pedestrian crashes in the last several years have been close to transit stops. And so we are assuming that those folks are trying to get to and from the bus, and we want to make sure that that is improved for riders. A BRT project also includes optimized stop spacing, which is something that can really improve the speed and reliability of the bus. And then we're also taking a look at what the appropriate vehicle would be for this type of line. Just quickly, the folks that we've been working with on this project, we have 2 staff groups from our agency partners and then a steering committee. We're working obviously with ODOT as the roadway owner in this case, Washington County, the 4 cities, And then on our steering committee, we also have 4 members who are from community-based organizations that work and serve communities in this corridor. I just want to take a quick minute to also make sure that folks are aware that alongside the transit study, we have worked with community members to create an equitable development strategy. This was recently completed and is now moving into an implementation phase with partners in the corridor, including through a Metro 2040 planning grant that is in cooperation with Washington County, but really being led by Unite Oregon to move forward community engagement around this equitable development strategy. And the goal here is to figure out what community needs are to ensure that folks are not adversely impacted through displacement when transit investment comes to the corridor. So what have we done to date? We, in the first phase of this project, had a design developed by our consulting team that identifies really high-level project elements and cost. And that design adhered to the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Small Starts program. And those are elements like those that I just talked about. So the station improvements, station access, fleet vehicles. And that design also included some corridor-wide treatments, for example, access control medians, in addition to the transit elements. And where we ended up with that was a rather hefty price tag of about $550 million. So we undertook an exercise this spring to think about whether it's possible to phase this project. There are a lot of lines that are probably a little hard to see and read on this slide, but point being here that we took a look at 6 different scenarios in terms of capital investment and operating to determine whether or not it would be feasible to phase this project. And we looked at that through the lens of the capital investment grant evaluation criteria. How competitive would we be for that federal grant? And then also through the lens of our project goals. So we brought that analysis to our steering committee. And firstly, breaking this project geographically likely results in a non-competitive second project phase. So that would mean that, for instance, a project from Beaverton to Hillsboro might be competitive, but then a later phase from Hillsboro to Forest Grove, just based upon the way that FTA evaluates these projects, is not likely to be very competitive for federal funding. We also heard really strong direction from the steering committee that they would like the whole corridor to be served with safety and transit improvements at the same time. In the first phase of our project, we have been doing outreach that is really just more informational about the project, not seeking a lot of input. So we have done information sharing through a couple means. And then the EDS, the Equitable Development Strategy, also had a couple public workshops, and we had a lot of community conversations with the coalition that led that work and also with a leadership development cohort. So where are we headed from here? As I mentioned, our known cost is that hefty price tag of $550 million, which presents us with a couple issues. One, the maximum federal contribution through small starts is $150 million. And then that remaining $400 million needs to be filled through local and state or other federal programs. And so with this knowledge, that funding strategy for our phase 1 design is really challenging and probably significantly lengthens the project timeline. So our approach in phase 2 is to work as hard as we possibly can with our design consultants to develop a lower cost design that's more likely to have a feasible funding strategy. We're going to take 2 approaches to doing that. One, that is a design that is CIG eligible, meaning it has those components that the FTA requires for federal funding. And we're also going to be doing an exercise to try to figure out whether there is a project that could be locally funded that still meets enough of our project goals to be palatable to all the partners in the corridor, but could possibly move forward on a quicker timeline or with a smaller price tag. And we'll be bringing both of those options to our steering committee, along with, our project team's opinions about how we balance the goals of meeting the needs for TV Highway with that real interest in getting a project done and making something happen. So for this lowest cost permittable option, we really want to make sure that we're maintaining those core purposes of access and safety improvements and transit rider amenities. We're looking for flexibility in terms of those elements that could provide significant benefits to project cost. One of the real challenges in this corridor is just how tight it is and the existing conditions out there with the railroad adjacent. So we're really having to work with some pretty challenging conditions and figure out where these cost savings could come from. As I said, we're going to be presenting the cost of that CIG, capital investment grant, and a locally funded project with benefits and trade-offs. Our overall goal is to get the steering committee to identify these elements of the project. We know that it's going to be a bus. We have gotten our strong guidance from the steering committee already that they would like to see it all the way from Beaverton to Forest Grove. We're working right now on identifying general station locations. And the last key piece of this is going to be to identify a high-level funding strategy. So in the coming months, we have just had our November steering committee meeting last week where we furthered discussion about station locations and brought a public involvement plan regarding station locations. In December, I am keeping my fingers crossed that we will approve that map for public comment, and that public comment will happen later in the project. In February, we're going to be bringing that next phase 2 design and cost to staff and expecting them to have conversations with their steering committee members so that in April we can reconvene as a group and also be discussing that high-level funding plan. And really from there, the steps are going to be determined by the feedback that we hear from the committee in that April meeting. And just a quick note, we are developing that engagement approach for phase 2. The key ask is for station locations input. We have developed an approach based on jurisdiction and feedback from our community-based organization partners with a real focus on transit riders. And as I noted, the timeframe for this will be based on where we are in terms of project decisions and project process. So that's where we've been and a little bit about where we're headed. I am happy to take questions and I'll stop sharing my screen so we can actually all see one another for that discussion.
All right, thank you, Jess. Questions for Jess? Give people a moment to get back on the screen here. Mayor Callaway.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jess. A few things, one with the equitable development strategy, I just want to acknowledge that Washington County's diversity is overlooked. We are the most diverse county in our state, and yet we don't have the advocacy groups, the affinity groups, in Washington County that you have in Multnomah County and especially in Portland. And I just want to make sure that as the equitable strategy, the equitable development strategy is put together, that you pay attention to Washington County. And again, we can give examples of how, of just the heavy usage you acknowledged. We can give you personal stories of that if that helps, but I just want to make sure that our diversity is acknowledged and taken into account. With the articulated buses, which could be a part of this, they need 60 feet and not 40 feet of like turnout or pull out. And yet we used to have articulated buses on TV Highway. So do we really, shouldn't our bus stops already be equipped to handle articulated buses without having to do some, some additional modifications or changes? So I guess that's one, so there's a question. Another question is, with the railroad conflict with mass transit, we know that happens throughout the country. And so is there a way that TriMet's lobby can work, with the federal agency that also oversees the railroads? Because I know that the conflict with railroad right-of-way is not unique to TV Highway in Washington County. And then, I guess one of the things, there are times that we look at the density, and I recognize the population density on 82nd is greater than, line 57 in its totality. But when I consider the fact that many times our low income people are pushed farther and farther and farther out, then that has to also be taken into account. The example of a project from Beaverton to Hillsboro could work, but not from Hillsboro to Forest Grove. And I recognize that's just hypothetical, but there is a reality in there that the folks who live farther out from Hillsboro are the ones that maybe need it more. Or if they don't meet the criteria, that's faulty criteria for the project, because as more and more people get pushed farther and farther out and they are dependent on mass transit, then we are creating difficulties for them beyond what they already experience. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Callaway, for those comments. I think I have 4 things to address. Kelly, Tara, hop in. I think that maybe you, Tara, can take the question about interaction with Union Pacific, but I can start on that too. So yes, incredible diversity in the TV Highway Corridor and in Washington County generally. I didn't mention that as part of the equity coalition that developed the EDS, we had groups that represent some of that diversity in the corridor. So Apano was involved, Centro Cultural, Adelante Mujeres, Muslim Educational Trust. Those were all members of our coalition that developed the EDS. So it really is targeted and responsive to that diversity in the corridor. Great question about the station design. A couple things. We are investigating whether a 60-foot or a 40-foot bus is what would be implemented here. TriMet is moving toward a sort of agency-wide policy where when they are rebuilding their station locations or stop locations, they're planning on a 60-foot bus for any line in the system. Just acknowledging that there is going to be a future of greater ridership and that a 60-foot bus could be necessary on any line in the system. So that's really an agency policy that they're moving toward. The other reason that we would rebuild station locations is to move toward a near level boarding platform, which is another benefit of a project like this, so that you have the ability for people to get on and off the bus a lot more easily without a gap between the curb and where they get on the bus. It's helpful for folks with mobility devices, shopping carts, strollers, and it also helps speed the bus up so that you don't have to deploy that ramp out quite as often. Folks are more able to make that quick step up. I don't know about how many of the pullouts today are designed for a 60-foot bus, but this project would be looking to probably reconstruct most of those that are already out there today. Railroad question. Tara, do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like this is a good question for you.
Sure, and thanks for flagging that, Mayor Callaway. As you know, there's some of our stops that are really just abutting the right-of-way for the railroad, and that addressing that need is a key component of the project as we look at these stops and the access to those stops as well. But in terms of conflicts with the railroad and how to resolve those, so there are certainly some programs at the federal level, like the Rail Crossing Elimination Grant Program, which I know we've looked at for 185th. But we do work closely with the railroads and our lobby team. Was the question if there's changes we need to make at the federal level to try to address this issue of the close proximity, or What was the specific issue that you were hoping we could look into a bit more? So not a specific change, but just looking to see if there were things we could work on, if there was federal funds available to help with that.
Because I know there's a lot of cities that are working with the federal transportation, I forget which department it is, on rerouting the railroad tracks and the like. But I see Jeff had his hand up, but I think it's, the question all the mayors have is the railroad's the biggest limitation on adding lanes. So how's this bus going to function without the addition of a lane? Only way we can do that is working with the railroad. But there's quite a bit of movement with the last few years of railroad safety bubbling up about getting railroads outside within city limits and also making sure they're above grade. But Jeff, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think the specific on this one, Terry, that we run into is we have stops today that sit within the 60-foot right-of-way of the track. Now, if you ask me about it, I think the challenge is pushing back on that 60-foot right-of-way. To what Frank brought up is the safety concern. This is not a high-speed railway where if a train derails, it's going to skid and slam and there's a bunch of potential energy built up. You're talking about a train that operates at just above a pedestrian pace in the right-of-way. And if it could get enough energy up to derail, it would be like watching a steamroller come at you. I think you might have a chance of walking away from it. I don't want to underplay the safety issue, but I think that's our bigger challenge is how do we push back on that? What feels arbitrary and capricious is to have a 60-foot right-of-way just because we say so, when the more important thing here is having a safe place for if we need a pull out from a 45-mile-an-hour highway to get the bus so it's safe and doesn't create an extensive impediment to the highway. How do we justify that in that 60-foot right-of-way? And I think that's where it really crosses over to your help. And our ask from you is how do we challenge and push back on that? Because it's obviously the railway, they've got 60 feet that they can move, and I don't think they're going to move their rail anywhere in that 60-foot right-of-way. How do we push back on that 60-foot requirement? Because it seems arbitrary and capricious on this particular area. And a much more important thing is on a 45-mile-an-hour way to get the bus out of a 45-mile-an-hour rear end collision condition.
I'll certainly share that with our team and discuss with our federal affairs team as well. As you know, the stops in the right of way are issue, but the access to transit is really a key part of this project and what we've heard from the community. But
and that would be the follow-on, right? That would be the follow-on, right? Because it's not only as if we've got a stop that's pushed into the right of way, we're going to need to be able to also get curb, gutter, sidewalk that provides access in that, and that may be an ongoing impediment to the 60-foot right of way. So how do we not get through the first one, but also the follow-on that makes it carry forward?
Other questions for Jess? Jeff.
Yes, Jess, do you think if I just start collecting bottles and cans along the highway and the busway, I'll get enough money to pay for this? I mean, that is really the big, if I say an elephant in the room, it doesn't feel big enough. Maybe it's a blue whale beached in the room is how the local portion would help pay into this. Because I mean, we're talking about right now, a $550 million project, which 150 of it might come from the feds. That's just, if you hadn't noticed in the news, we just tripled our fire levy to be able to continue our fire service and do what we needed to do. So I don't know where there's another dollar of money for this particular activity. So I think we all know it's important and we need to address it, especially on the safety and the customer side of it when they're just clamoring for covered bus shelters. But I just don't know where the money comes from.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Delaney. I think that is the key challenge of this project moving forward. Our real goal is that this phase 2 design is significantly lower than $550 million, but it's still going to have a significant local match. If we, when we find out what that design and cost is. And we have heard and know that, jurisdictions up and down the corridor are fiscally constrained now, and it's really hard to see past that. And looking ahead, and you're balancing the needs for public safety in your community with your fire levy with, needs for community safety and access. And so, yeah, we definitely see that challenge. Kelly, I don't know if you want to step in with any thoughts about funding moving forward, just because, you've been through this part of a project like this.
Sure. Kelly Betteridge, Investment Areas Manager here at Metro. And so I think, the work that Jess's team is doing now to come up with some lower cost options will lead us to be able to have a more robust conversation about potential paths forward. You're absolutely right. It's a big hill to climb, but I think having this information will allow us to come up with a few different creative ways that we could move forward. Understanding that one of them is a very large project, but there's also likely to be some others that come out of this process that we can have conversations about in terms of trade-offs. So for now, it's about gathering the right information, and then it's about sort of weighing potential options and then making the right selection in terms of path forward. So more will be revealed, but you're absolutely right. This is not an easy one.
Councilor Rosenthal. You're still muted, Garrett.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to commend Jess and Tara on making a good presentation on a project that has gotten very complex. I mean, there's been quite a bit of progress. One is the identification that a complete system from Forest Grove all the way in is something that was highly needed. And the other one is the issues of safety and equity, making bus stops welcoming, not just safe, but also welcoming and not totally open to the elements. And so these are things that have come, and there's been a lot of progress on this and a lot of agreement. But it's been, I just want to give them kudos for handling a project that has taken a couple twists and turns. It's a complex system, and we're moving forward. But obviously, funding is going to be a big issue. Oh, I should ask also that as far as safety, ODOT should be given some kudos also for, they have been pursuing some safety improvements on some of the crossings. And so there has been work going on. It's not like we're just, things are hanging back and nothing's happening in the interim.
All right. Mary Delane.
I would chime in after Garrett on that so often we've done a bunch of analyses in a bunch of areas, and then we take that nice book and we put it up on the shelf and go, well, that was nice, thank you. I think the difference with where we're headed on this plan is we're looking at a unified plan, no matter how the funding or the busing or what, there's so many little decisions that can be made. I think at least at the end, we will have a unified plan where when ODOT looks at it, they go, oh, this is one of the stops we should be facilitating as we do crossings for rapid flashing beacons, because this is on the TV highway plan. Oh, Cornelius, you want to put in a new covered stop on your own dime, or you've gotten a scout project or an artist donation of a covered bus stop. Where do you put it? Oh, well, we want to put it right here because it's on the unified plan that pulls all of us together so that we're all at least building and working on these incremental things like the ODOT point towards a unified plan that supports the ultimate goal of making it safer, more customer friendly, get more people on, and that the crossings are there. So I think unlike so many other plans that we just do and then put on the shelf, this one actually has a real usable life to it.
All right. Any other discussion or questions? All right. Well, thank you, Jess, for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. That brings us to 4B, the Washington County Transportation Capital Project Planning Update. This will be led by Stephen along with Jessica. Steve will be giving us an update on the CIP planning. This is a separate but tangential conversation about, MSTIP We have that retreat coming up, but that we'll discuss that at the end of the agenda today. But Stephen and Jessica wanted to give an update on what's going on with the transportation system framework and priorities. Welcome, Stephen. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll move through this fairly quickly. We want to make sure we have ample time to talk about RTP coming up here. And this session, really, one of our primary objectives is really just to lay some groundwork with the committee before we come into the retreat in a few weeks, where we'll be asking to start diving back into thinking about priorities for future transportation projects. So we'll just walk through that fairly quickly. Next slide, please. So again, just really quickly, we're going to step through things about just our transportation system framework generally, some of the needs and how we think about priorities, a little bit of info about MSTIP itself. We've talked before about some of these issues, and then really we're going to lean in today more about the process moving forward as we're developing our transportation capital improvement plan. Next slide. So this is a tool that we're using to kind of ground ourselves as we think about all of the different needs and the pushes and pulls that are happening as we're thinking about trying to frame up a transportation system plan and think about priorities for projects. So we're just needing to balance all of these different needs and expectations that are around us and try to right size a program and pick the right projects based on all of those different inputs. Next slide. So the county top priority really is just helping to maintain and manage what we hope will be a safe, functional, and accessible transportation system. And we currently manage about 1,300 miles of streets and roads in Washington County. And that's a combination of the local streets in our urban unincorporated areas, but a lot of that mileage is also our roads, major roadways that run through cities, and then also rural roads. So we actually have been able to maintain really good pavement conditions, but we are starting to see those numbers slowly decline. So pavement condition is starting to deteriorate a little bit. And that therefore means essentially we'll need to start ramping up maintenance expenditures. We have a number of accessibility upgrades that we're in the process of making. And so those are quite expensive, but we need to make sure that we have an accessible system. And then we have bridge needs. So we have seen a number of bridges that are starting to be load rated or weight limited. And so we're needing to start really paying attention to some of those needs, as well as just knowing that we have some seismic deficiencies in some of our older bridges as well. And then in addition to sort of that maintain and keep up the system that we have, we're also in the middle of a growing community and it's changing. So we have a number of substandard urban streets that are lacking some of their basic urban type improvements, bike and ped facilities in particular. We have gaps in the transportation network in some of our existing urban areas. And then we also have urban expansion areas that do need these kinds of improvements done as well. Next slide. So in our transportation system plan currently, there's about $6 billion in identified needs, and those are probably outdated numbers, but that's a combination if you were to try to assume that you're going to build every project that's identified in the county's transportation system plan. And that's a combination of road and transit improvements. It's about 50-50. So as we started our prioritization efforts a little over a year ago, we were calling that MSTIP 2328, assuming that we'd start thinking about how to prioritize about 5 years of funding starting in fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 28. We paused that work, but we're picking it back up again. And so we'd identified about $400 million in some near-term project priorities as potential candidates to fund, knowing that we had been funding MSTIP projects at about $35 million per year over the previous 10 years or so. So about $175 million as a potential funding target for a 5-year program cycle. So the capital improvement plan, of course, is the tool for helping to sort of plan out, prioritize, and then figure out how to fund or finance those improvements. Next slide. So I think you've probably all heard this by now. I won't spend much time here. MSTIP has just been a long-standing program. The criteria are down at the bottom there that you can see. So really emphasizing safety, traffic flow and congestion relief, major roads generally that are used by a lot of residents. And you'll remember we have a system of countywide interest map that is used as a tool for eligibility for MSTIP funding. It needs to be on that map. And the map includes basically all arterials in the county and certain collector streets that have been identified by the WCCC as potential parts of that countywide system. Mayor Mays, did you have a comment or question? Or Councilor?
I was just commenting that, I mean, it's, yes, on the transportation map, the county grid map that's been adopted by this group. So I was just, the line of being on a major road used by many residents, I mean, it's got to be on the approved map, right?
Right. That's been the tool for implementing that criteria. Yep. Okay. Next slide, please. Thanks. So, and you'll remember too, we entered into a bonding cost sharing program. That was something that the board identified in 2015. That was identifying certain transportation projects, 20 projects that were in 4 specific urban growth boundary expansion areas. And in that program, MSTIP is funding 2/3 of the costs. And we've done that by issuing bonds and using portions of our annual general fund allocation to the MSTIP program to pay the debt service on those bonds. So county MSTIP is essentially funding 2/3 of those projects. Other funding sources are paying the remaining 1/3. If the project was in a city, the city is helping to make up that 1/3. If it was in the county's using other county funding sources to help complete those project costs. We had 2 bond sales planned for that program. We did the first one in 2016. We're anticipating doing the second one in 2024. And then we, by doing the bonding cost sharing program, part of the objective there was to maintain an annual pay-as-you-go allocation to complete what we call our standard MSTIP cycles, the MSTIP 3D and 3E projects. Next slide. So I think you've all seen this before too. We're just trying to illustrate that we are sort of moving along on 3 parallel tracks, if you will, leading into the development of our county CIP. So on the one hand, we're looking back. Step 1 is trying to make sure that we have the funding and available to complete prior projects through the 3D, 3E, and bonding cost sharing programs. We're also on a parallel track, planning ahead, looking at future capital project priorities. And then we're also looking at programmatic allocations, which we'll come back to in just a minute. Next slide. Oh, keep going. Okay. So that's just a quick, kind of a bar chart that represents actual MSTIP 3D, 3E, and bonding cost sharing projects. And the color coding just indicates the construction phasing. One of the key takeaways here is that we complete a lot of that work starting in FY 24-25 and really wrap up the last of those projects in FY 26-27. So as we're working on completing those projects, we're also starting to now queue up a new slate of priority projects to move into the project development cycle. Next slide. We've talked about this. We've identified a funding gap in our MSTIP 3D and 3E projects of about $90 million. We're continuing work internally at the county with our chief finance officer and our county administrative office, trying to ensure that we can come up with a strategy for how we address that funding gap, while also allowing us to start introducing some new projects into our project pipeline. Next slide. We've talked about this with you before, I'm pretty sure. We're looking at potential scope reductions, some project deferrals, we're actually bringing us a significant amount of transportation development tax funding to help close the gap on some of the county sponsored projects. We're having discussions with a number of cities about potential funding contributions there. And we're proceeding with grant applications on a number of projects. No success so far, but we're going to keep trying. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on potential funding and financing scenarios for how we move forward. And that's ongoing work. Next slide. There's a lot here. I'm not going to really spend much time on this. If you have questions about it, it's in your board pack or your agenda packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions offline. But we really are just looking at ways to ensure, again, that we have funding to complete those bonding cost sharing projects. And we're considering potentially some additional bonding to help close the gap for those 3D and 3E projects. And again, that's sort of our ongoing work internally and with our board just to help flesh out those scenarios. Next slide. So now we're pivoting to the look ahead part. So this planning ahead for future project priorities. Next slide. I think we've looked at this before. Just a little reminder, we all play a part in this process. And in particular, this body, the WCCC, helps to shape recommendations on projects and priorities to share with the Board of Commissioners who make the final determinations. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, we're really looking to pick up our MSTIP 23-28 prioritization work and moving that forward into our capital improvement plan. We are doing that because we had a lot of community engagement and really focused, I think, as someone was mentioning earlier, on making sure that we were doing the best we could to try to engage a really diverse cross-section of our community. We did a lot of work with some CBO partners to try to engage communities that we often don't hear from. And I think we were somewhat successful there. We did some preliminary project cost estimating work, and we're actually just updating that now. And then we've had identified a list of about 25 potential future projects, and again, predicated on those criteria that we talked about earlier for MSTIP. But in this case, looking also at equity index scoring, that we created an equity index to try to help provide another means of input into evaluating projects. We did some community survey work and shared that. We'll look at that again in just a moment. And then assessing potential construction risk as we're thinking about making sure that we identify an appropriate amount of funding to make sure we can move these projects forward. So as I said, we paused that work late last year, about this time probably, and we were really pivoting our attention toward ensuring that we could work on our strategy for identifying the size and strategies for closing that funding gap that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So at the work, or at your retreat, I should say, we'll be picking up again this prioritization work. So we wanted to just ensure that you had a refresher on what the projects were that were identified. And these were identified by Commissioner District. And that's just really for our purposes internally, just ensuring that we have a way to sort of break the list up into smaller groupings. And in the past, our board has requested that we work to identify a roughly equivalent amount of funding across the 4 commissioner districts. One of the other tenets, if you will, of the MSTIP program is making sure that we're spending those funds around the county in different places, or all around the county. So these are the District 1 projects. That's Commissioner Fai's district. It covers most of Beaverton and Aloha. Next slide. So District 2, that's sort of the northeast quadrant of the county, includes Bethany area, Cedar Hill, Cedar Mill, and the northern portions of Beaverton, and actually makes it all the way over into northeast quadrant of Hillsboro. Next slide. District 3. Oh, and I forgot to mention District 2 is Commissioner Treese's district. District 3 is Commissioner Rogers. That's kind of the Tualatin, Sherwood, Tigard area. And you can see the list there. And next slide. And District 4, that's Commissioner Willie's district. So that's sort of the western 2/3, let's say, of Hillsboro and points west for the most part. Next slide. And I wanted to just touch briefly on these programmatic allocations. We've talked about this as well, but as we're planning for identified projects, we also have some programmatic set-asides that we want to carry forward. Next slide. Some of those are our favorites, the Opportunity Fund, which has been super successful at leveraging outside funding. The Rural Bridges Program, we just don't really have a good funding source to help address some of the deficiencies we have on rural bridges. Intelligent Transportation Systems, that's really trying to maximize the efficiency of the system that we do have through smarter traffic signal systems and traffic management systems. And then a couple of things that we want to look at going forward are potential large project matches. With so much federal funding available, there may be opportunities to seek larger federal grants, but that means we also need larger local matches. And then we have not had in the past an MSTIP program contingency. So we also think that would be an important element again in helping us to manage risk and potential cost escalation over time. And then, oh, sorry, if you can go back just one sec. The charts on the right just show the funding allocations from the last two MSTIP cycles. And I think the one I like to point out is the Opportunity Fund. It went from $5 million in the 3D cycle. It was so successful, we brought it up to 7.5 million in the 3E funding cycle. And we think we need to go significantly larger in the upcoming cycle as well, because it has been so successful and really does help us to bring a lot of external money into the county. Next slide. So we shared a version of this presentation with the TAC, your staff advisory body last week or a week and a half ago. We're presenting to you today as well. And again, this is really in preparation for the workshop on December 4th, where we'll have some activities and some discussion items to help shape this prioritization work. We're not asking you for a decision at that workshop. We'll be back to you in January and be seeking a recommendation for the Board of Commissioners. And in that process, of course, we'll be involving the TAC, the staff team, and helping to shape recommendations for your body to consider. Next slide. And this is just a quick chart, just sort of showing some of those steps as we're sort of cascading down here through these different steps and processes. Ultimately, where we're trying to get to is board adoption of the county's CIP in late spring ahead of the budget. Next slide. And then our discussion questions, just concerns or questions that you may have, and any other thoughts or suggestions as we're shaping that workshop item for you on December 4th. And with that, we can take questions.
Steve, I just have a quick question. Mayor Lanahan. Will any TAC members be present on December 4th, or is it just this body?
Yes, that's a great question. We are inviting both WCCC members and alternates, but we're also inviting TAC members. The invitation actually just went out just before this meeting today. And we'll actually be seeking some help from folks to actually maybe help present the candidate projects too, and maybe answer questions, so that if you will have some time programmed on the workshop agenda for you to move around and take a look at project information, and then maybe talk to staff members if you have questions about them.
Yeah, I was wondering, because if there were some technical questions that might come up and we might not be able to answer them, if TAC members are there, they might be able to help us dive a little deeper into that. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. That was a great question.
Mayor Callaway.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen. Great name and great presentation. A few questions. The priorities for MSTIP, and the priorities that the county have for their transportation, they seem to be very tightly connected. I would argue they're the same in terms of safe, functional, accessible, and MSTIP might be a little bit more wordy, but it's the same thing. And yet I question how the county can claim we're focusing on safe, functional, and accessible when MSTIP is being cut so dramatically. And that's not so much, that's just a comment. There's no question there, but I know that there are others who watch this and are listening now, and I think it's important for them to hear that at least from me. I'm curious, we have 25 projects and we need to reduce them to 10 to 11 projects roughly. But are we just looking at the number of projects, or are we looking at a dollar amount? Because depending on what's selected, we might be able to, we might do 10 projects, or we could do 18 projects that don't cost as much. So is it number of projects that we're focusing on, or is it a dollar amount? And then I got another question or two after that.
Okay, well, that is an excellent question. I'll take that last one there. I think, well, and maybe let me step back. So I want to be clear. So the MSTIP program, there was a one-time $3.5 million reduction in the current budget year in the amount transferred from the general fund to the MSTIP fund. So at this time, that's the extent of any cuts that have been made, if you will, to the program. So it was that one-time reduction, and that was true really across the board for the county. All general fund allocations or budgets were expected to reduce by about 7% rather. So we participated in that exercise. And then I think in terms of whether we're looking at a number of projects or a dollar amount, at this point, they're both sort of moving targets, to be perfectly honest. And so I think as we're continuing our internal work to evaluate the county's financial situation and how we, again, looking back at making sure we can complete prior projects, but also starting to introduce new projects, we don't know exactly how that's going to work out. So one of our thoughts is really to just get a sense of priorities for the 25 projects, and we might think about grouping those into kind of a high, medium, and low prioritization groupings. And then as we start to get more clarity just around the funding picture and what that looks like going forward, then we can move those highest priority projects, if you will, in for funding, and maybe some of the medium projects, and just understanding that we may have some flexibility in terms of how many projects make it in there. And then also really just thinking about the time span, right? So we may identify 15 projects, but we're going to say that might take a 6 or 7 years worth of potential funding. So I think there's a couple of different ways we could get at this.
Thank you. And I appreciate the clarification on the budget, on the budgetary reductions. Knowing that the county has deficits going forward, I think that I was just assuming that additional cuts down the road would, no pun intended, would be made to MSTIP as they were this year. So I would love it if, there was a option 4 that said MSTIP will not be touched, and maybe that's there too, and unspoken. At the TAC, at the WCCC TAC, there was also a mention that WCCC bylaws are proposed to be changed. And if you could address those, that would be really helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. I think we actually have another agenda item at the very end. If we have time, we'll come back to, and we can just touch on that. But we don't really have any material to share, but there are some comments or questions around some potential changes to the bylaws and TAC and TPAC membership potentially that we'll have as discussion topics for December 4th.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Stephen? All right, I don't see any. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
That'll bring us to 4C, the RTP update. As I understand, the MPAC meeting was quite lively between all the different agencies involved with this RTP process. So I'm going to ask for our TAC members to be elevated up to presentation so they can give us an update on what occurred at the MPAC meeting. If hopefully you had a chance to read your packet. We all know that the RTP has to be voted on by the Metro Council here by mid-December in order to get federal monies. There is a host of amendments that were suggested at the MPAC meeting. One of them promoted by Clackamas County to change the constrained project list to remove funding for parts of the tolling program. So I'm going to let since I wasn't there, I'm Mayor Rosner was there, but Mayor Rosner's not able to attend today because he filled me in, and as did Mayor Buck, who was the person who proposed the amendment on tolling. So if we could have our TAC members discuss what was the item of significant discussion, because I heard most of the things worked out very well, but the Clackamas County contingent is not very happy with Washington County at this point. So who do I see is here from the TAC?
And so, Chair, I want to point out too, we have Chris Ford.
Chris
from
Ford's here
ODOT
also.
is available.
He'll get some time too, because ODOT was
Chris
not
is,
happy. I understand that.
And Chris has brought Zoe Westenberg from their team as well. And gosh, Jessica, did I miss anybody?
Yep, Kim Ellis is here from Metro. She can help support the conversation and also just point out Tara was also on TPAC. And so I think there's a lot of people that can help support this conversation.
So I'll lead it off with the chair of TPAC, Mike McCarthy, and then Gianni and Greg, you can also let us know what happened. And then Mr. Ford will be able to discuss why ODOT has a problem with Clackamas County's suggested amendment. Mike, over to you. And you're muted, Mike.
All right. Actually, is there someone on the call who's at the MPAC meeting that will be able to relate that discussion a little more? And all right, so
I was present at MPAC. I know Kim was as well, so Kim may be able to provide a little bit more context. But the amendment that was brought forward was essentially to amend the RTP constrained project list to split the I-5, I-205 regional mobility pricing project into 2 phases, and retaining the preliminary engineering phase only in the constrained project list. So moving the construction phase to the strategic project list. And so that's the general summary of the issues. I think some of the I can just, while I have the floor, I suppose,
go for it,
convey some of the concerns that we have expressed just in general, kind of, or that was expressed at TPAC. The conversation really revolved around just the timing of the amendment, and the fact that at Impact ODOT was not present to really provide much context or elaborate on the potential implications of the amendment. And so TPAC, we had some information, but not the full picture of what those implications looked like. And so I think our concern was really understanding what those implications are on the process and the project overall, and in terms of meeting our regional performance measure goals and climate goals, and and then also some concerns around just the precedent that this type of an advisory body taking action on a project list of an agency or jurisdiction. So those are some of the concerns that we expressed at TPAC, and our representative on Impact also expressed some of those concerns.
Okay. If you're on a different screen, Mr. Ford, and this is Chris on a different screen. Let's see, where is he? There you are. Chris.
Hi, and it probably makes sense for me to tag team this with Kim Ellis from Metro a bit. So I can speak on behalf of ODOT, and Kim can speak on behalf of, I would say, the RTP process a little bit. So we're probably going to say similar things, but we may have slightly different perspectives. But for the sake of informing this committee, I think that's probably important. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I was on vacation, which is, of course, when these things happen. So the vacation was great. I really recommend Oaxaca. Wonderful food. So I kind of wish I was still there. I came back to discover this, which is an interesting way of framing it, because one of the challenges is no one gave us a call. We weren't aware of this being discussed. You know, we definitely have had our challenges in the agency and working with a bunch of the partners, and that's not a statement I'm right or wrong, but I would say at no point that I'm aware of was a move like this previously discussed. There was no conversation about what would be the implications or what would go. So we're as surprised as everybody else. So I think that's worth talking about. There's the what and the how, and I'll be brief. So we do have a document. I think Jessica Pell's probably just got a copy of it before this, that our mobility office has put together with some information in response. Metro has their own memo that I think is included in the RTP materials there, or JPACT materials. They're probably related. There's a little bit of different information in the two of them and maybe some slightly different perspectives, but I'm going to guess they're largely supplemental. The what and the how are both concerning. The how is concerning. Deami did a great job of summarizing that. And I just think as agencies, you can consider the implications of having committees that you're not a part of making changes to your project list. I've heard the comment about, well, this is different. But I guess you can just think going forward, if that's how we want to, handle transportation obligations and planning in the future as a region, that's an option. But I think it's an option with some challenges. It's also challenging for this to be very late in the process. What are the implications of all of this? What's it going to cost? We don't have all the answers. This hasn't been a space where we have all the information. But here's what we believe we know at this point. FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, requires all phases of a project to be in a regional transportation plan, or as they call it, an MTP, in order for a NEPA findings, FONSI, ROD, finding of no significant effect, record of decision, et cetera, to be issued. So we don't believe that the NEPA process, can start, but it can't end without that being the case. There's also a challenge that there already are leverage points and votes built into the process, particularly for the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Any future phases of the RMPP have to be amended in, going through TPAC and JPACT and Metro Council, in order for the funding for those to be obligated. Those already exist. There's the RTAC, there's the OTC. I've heard it argued that this is a leverage point, and I would say that there's already a lot of those. And then this will definitely delay the process. And ultimately, my biggest concern as a planner who loves process is the purpose of the RTP is, what do we plan to do? And either we plan to build this with discussions along the way, or we don't plan to build this. I think it's pretty binary. And so ultimately the question is, do we say the plan is to move forward with this, with discussions and details to come, or do we not? And what this message is saying we don't plan to move forward with this. And it is a option for congestion pricing, for managing demand. It is a climate tool. It's also potentially a way to generate revenue for transportation investments. Are we planning as a region to do this or not? And so those are really the questions before us. I want to look to Kim to see if she wants to add anything onto that. I know that you asked the question of me, but I'm not the only person kind of at the heart of this.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm Kim Ellis, the project manager for Metro for the Regional Transportation Plan update. I think Deami's description and Chris's sort of perspective about this are important. I think from a RTP perspective, I think where I would differ a little bit from what Chris just offered is that it's not removing the project from the plan by this proposed amendment. It's basically phasing it in a way that from what we understand from the Clackamas County representatives that brought forward the amendment, they're wanting to have more, they do want to have more leverage points as Chris laid out. But it's not saying that the region is not planning that work. It's saying it's not ready to have that construction phase in the plan until more answers are addressed and the policies and the commitments that ODOT has made on behalf of that project, but also the other tolling projects that are underway. I think that it does affect the timing, and as Chris said, in order for the NEPA process to conclude and the federal agencies to make a finding or issue a finding to advance the project, the construction phase would need to be amended into the regional transportation plan. And so there is a background memo, as Chris noted, that is included in the JPACT packet, and I can provide a link, or Jessica can send that out after the meeting for folks who have not had an opportunity to look at that, but it does describe that process. And it is currently unclear from the project materials that are available about the project as to when the NEPA process is planned to be completed. The environmental assessment is under what we understand is the draft will be released at the end of next year. This action does not prohibit or stop the NEPA process from going forward, but as Chris said, it does create uncertainty as to the conclusion of it, and it's also unknown when the planned completion of the NEPA process is scheduled under ODOT's current timeline and work.
Okay. So going back to our TAC members, it's my understanding that you gentlemen are in favor of the RTP in its present form, that the changes, or most of the changes we requested them on behalf of Washington County residents, have been incorporated. So I'm just going to put the tolling one to the side so we can get back to that, because we're running short on time. I just wanted to hear your feelings on how you feel about the RTP right now, and how you would advise the vote to go for JPAC.
So I'll jump in, and Mike McCarthy, the Washington County City's rep on TPAC. And, you know, in the end, I ended up voting yes for the RTP to advance forward. It was somewhat reluctant, but I think in any kind of a process like this, I don't think we're going to have agreement on everything, but I think there were enough kind of changes or adjustments that Metro made that I was willing to vote, affirmative to move this along, particularly with the deadline coming, that if it's not adopted by, I believe it's December 6th, that federal funds stop for projects in the region. TPAC voted, I believe it was 14-3 to recommend, advancement of the RTP, or that JPACT advance the RTP. The most contentious issue was that tolling conversation and the amendment to move the tolling infrastructure construction phase basically from the funded category into a future category. And there was some contention about that. There was an ODOT amendment, or an amendment advanced by ODOT that did pass, that I believe softened some of the ODOT shell language that was in there. That passed. And then with that, the recommendations about the tolling policy, with the amendment to move the tolling construction passed. And then the other aspects of the plan were recommended by TPAC to pass as well.
Okay.
So I think our recommendation to summary is, we don't think it's perfect. There's a number of things we disagree with, but we recommend moving it forward.
All right.
I think that really sums it up well, Mike. I mean, if the mobility policy were to have gone into force without the ways that we've suggested changes, I think it would be a solid no. But with the mobility policy implementation being delayed, that's going to save all of our growth areas and preserve that housing stock, which is in the urban reserves for a while yet. So we do have to look forward to the regional transportation functional plan so that we can develop those housing areas with as little procedural impediments as possible. And I think that the high capacity transit, we've discussed a lot of it at the TAC level, 99W and US 26, and priorities that we have from city's perspective for Washington County that may not be reflected regionally. Well, we've got some work to do here in the next several years, and I want to see 99W on the list next time around for high capacity transit was US 26. So we've got some goals set out. I don't think we got everything we wanted there, but we certainly have some things to do to get better in the future, and that's where we're headed.
All right. We've got 9 minutes left, so I want to open the floor to questions to our TAC members or to Mr. Ford. Quick editorial comment. I know Clackamas County, like I said, is not happy. I got calls from my fellow Clackamas County mayors about this. They are very dug in about the tolling issue, as we all know. So it's not going to go away. But as far as the rest of the plan, which, like we said, is very important, we gotta have something to get that federal money. Any questions for our TAC members? Stephen.
Thank you. Not a question, but a comment. I think we just received some ODOT information that sheds maybe a bit more light around some of the concerns they have with the proposed amendments in the RTP and has a potential proposed counter amendment. Chris, are you comfortable if we share that out with the members?
Please do. Yeah. And so what happened, and I really appreciate, the good recap on everything important, including the regional mobility policy from the TAC members here. There was, ultimately what TPAC basically did, and this was, a discussion among some of the agencies, was to move the RMPP, RTP discussion really to JPACT and called upon Metro and ODOT to provide as much information as possible beforehand. This is us responding to that request. So we'll ask Metro staff to send to JPACT members, but providing it to the coordinating committee. Sorry, it's a little late. OTC, holidays, late notice, and all this. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. We'll get that out just after the meeting here.
All right. Any other questions for our TAC folks, because we're running short on time? Mayor Delane.
Not for our TAC folks, but for our representatives. I just need to vote Thursday, so I'd need a little feedback from you guys on how you'd like me to carry this vote on Thursday.
No one's hands going up. I mean, I'll go first. It's one of those things where I've talked to Councilor Rosenthal that you pinch your nose and you vote yes, because like Mike said, it's not perfect. There are issues. Ideally, things can be amended and an amendment process brought forward pretty quickly to fix the things that we think we need to be addressed with before the 3 years expires. Things that we know need to be tweaked, but would be a reluctant yes. I trust Mike and our TAC folks that they reviewed this very thoroughly. We're getting what we need to get done, and we can get this federal money flowing to do these projects in the region. But Mayor Callaway, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And this is where it's tough, because you can only vote 100% yes or 100% no, even though I may only like 58% of it or whatever. Choose the amount. But I would say personally, I lean over the 51% threshold. So, therefore I would say we support it, but I do think that we support it, acknowledging, these other things that, as have been mentioned. Thank you.
All right.
I'll let the other mayors weigh in, but if Kim wanted to chime in, my understanding is there'll be a number of different votes at JPACT on each of the different policy recommendations, as well as whether to preserve the MPAC recommendation to remove future phases of the RMPP. So there'll be a lot of votes to make. That's one piece, but then the overall RTP as well. So Kim, I don't know if you want to clarify that somewhat.
That's okay, Mayor Bubenek, if I can add to that. That is the case. So JPACT's action on Thursday is actually a series of, for the RTP action itself, there's going to be what we call consent items that'll be, the JPACT will be asked to approve as a bundle without discussion. That's part of what's Exhibit A, Part 1. And then each of the 5 discussion topics, of which the regional mobility pricing project recommendation is part of policy topic 2. That will be, those will be acted on individually. And then at the end, after JPACT has taken action on the consent items in each of those 5 topics, they will be asked to make an overall recommendation on approval of the RTP. And so I would say, so while members may vote no, yes or no on individual pieces of it, and that is what happened at TPAC. In the end, there was, as Mike said, an overall recommendation strongly in support of forwarding the regional transportation plan for adoption by the Metro Council. And that was also the case with the MPAC vote. There were differences in each of the discussion items in terms of was not unanimous for each of the discussion items, but it was unanimous at MPAC to recommend moving the RTP forward for adoption. It was not unanimous, as Mike said, at the TPAC meeting, in large part because of this regional mobility pricing amendment that MPAC had proposed. So you can vote yes and no, and then on the overall package as well.
Okay. So I got Chris and then Mayor, Mayor Mays, sorry. Councilman Mays, I could kind of get used to that still. Chris.
Super fast, and I have to drop off at 2. So thank you so much, Tara, for raising that. And that is true. And Kim ran through that process very clearly, and they did a great job at TPAC of going through those votes. So ODOT will, during the discussion on policy topic 2, which relates to pricing policy, will ask for a vote to amend to remove the impact recommendation, the Joe Buck amendment. That would, and what that would do is, and we don't view it as a phasing, we view it as a removal from the RTP of everything beyond the preliminary engineering, because it will take I don't know, 6, 9 month, however long it takes, RTP amendment process to promptly add those things back in. And so Kim has highlighted some of that. She's provided a slightly different perspective on what that means. We won't probably hear some of those perspectives at JPAC, but that is an amendment vote that ODOT's going to ask for. We are a no vote on the RTP, with the RMPP not fully included. The rest of the RTP we're really happy with. We think Metro's done a great job and they've been really good conversations. So it's solely about that. But given the direction from the legislature, and from the OTC, that is a required part of the RTP for us. Thanks.
That's President Mays.
Yeah, I wouldn't make the JPAC vote unanimous. I would, if that means Jeff votes no, great. Because to express that there is disagreement, significant disagreement with something. That's what 10 cents. It's still going to pass, but I'd vote against it.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Anyone else? We got a few minutes left. I'm going to do some agenda management here because I want Stephen and Jessica to have an opportunity to discuss the workshop. Then we'll pretty much already know what we're going to be talking about at JPAC. So, so Stephen and Jessica, give us the 411 on the retreat, please.
All right. I think Jessica may have a slide or two to share with us, or Teresa. So really, the big topic is really working on the MSTIP project prioritization that we just talked about. And then I think we'll, as I mentioned, doing a little bit of WCCC 101, just kind of a refresher on why we do what we do here, and revisiting the bylaws as they stand today, discussing some potential bylaw amendments. We're seeing your desktop, Teresa. And then I think the potential amendments to the bylaws, which would potentially consider a second vice chair position in the event we have both our chair and vice chair unable to attend a meeting, having a second vice chair who can chair the meeting. Potentially talking about establishing some bylaws for the TAC. We don't currently have any explicit bylaws for how that group operates. And then looking at potential either term limits or periodic review of TPAC representatives that represent the county and the cities of Washington County. Jessica, did I miss anything significant?
I think I'm sharing.
Not yet.
Can you remind people date and time also?
Yes, December 4th, 1 o'clock, sorry. Geez, 1 to 4:30. Hey, look at that, slides.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah, thanks.
And just to add to what Stephen was saying, as we asked the WCCC TAC members, we have a MSTIP lookbook, which has a page for each project with a bunch of information. So our idea was to ask the WCCC TAC members to come and staff their proposed projects. And we're going to print those lookbook pages in poster size and have them around the room for you to walk around. And we'll have the additional information about equity index score, community survey score, cost estimate, all those things that are in those project tables. And then I think we do have a slide on our tentative agenda here. Stephen basically just went through it. So I think.
Yeah, future work plan topics. That was another idea. Yeah, just to have a roundtable with you all about topics that you think are of interest to the WCCC, and then maybe thinking about priorities for those efforts, which ones are timely, which ones maybe a little bit later on. So as we have opportunities, it's rare, but as we have opportunities that aren't dictated by other agencies for your agenda, then we want to make sure that we are getting to some of the topics that you all have an interest in as well.
Right. Flipping back, Mayor Callaway, JPACT agenda. We know one big item. Is there anything else on the agenda that day?
Actually, it's going to be Mayor Delane and myself
Okay.
who will be covering for Washington County. But you covered it very well for what's on the agenda. The only other agenda item is the high capacity transit.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And we will protest vote if 99W is not on there.
Good. That was a big subject of discussion the other day I had with TriMet. So, yep. And then Mayor Rose.
Mayor.
Is that?
I'm just throwing love towards Jeff.
Yep. And Mayor Rosner's not here. Keith, did he fill you in on anything? Because he oversaw that meeting that was quite lively. He gave me an update, but
I think he gave you a better update than he gave me.
Okay. All right. Well, we're right at 2:03. Anything else we need to review before we call it a day here? All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We'll see you at the retreat.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Great to see everybody.